Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you back with us here at the Brazil Africa Forum for 2023. This afternoon, I would like to start out, first of all, thanking you for coming back on time, and once again, thanking our sponsors and so many who have supported us and allowed. We have our diamond sponsors, Afrexim Bank, African Development Bank Group, New Development Bank, Libya Iron and Steel Company, and our platinum sponsors, Itaipu Nacional, Fomplata, Development Bank, Fitco, Quintes, Roost, Zeferino, Arbora. We also thank all of our supporters, the Ministry of Foreign Relations in Brazil, the Arab Brazil Trade Chamber, Europharma, SP Business, Hayes Advocacia, Crua Cosméticos. We also thank our African Visions, African Business, and Atlântico for their support. And finally, our official airline, LATAM. This afternoon, in our first panel, we are going to be talking about PPPs and infrastructure investment and logistical integration in the South Atlantic. So I'd like to ask you to permission to change my role from presenter to moderator, and I would like to call our panel participants up on stage at this moment. First, I would like to call to the stage Mr. Mohammed Elfig. He
Company. Please, sir. Nice. Please. I would like to invite to the stage Mr. Abraham Hadik. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Headland. And I would like to invite to the stage Ms. Nana Spio Garbar. She is the manager of the Client Solutions Division at the African Development Bank. So, at this afternoon, we are talking about the partnership between private and public sector and the infrastructure investment and logistical integration in the Southern Atlantic. Historically, Brazil and African countries have lagged behind in addressing the infrastructure deficit, which hinders economic growth. During the last few years, with the global pandemic hitting development countries hardest, who already suffer with limited budgets, states and governments must plan efficiently to better take advantage of the post-COVID economic recovery. So, private and public partnerships are powerful tools for the attraction of sorely needed investments and expertise. I would like to start this conversation asking for our panelists to talk with us. How can we expand and consolidate logistical connectivity, and promote a great exchange of goods and services between Brazil and African countries. So who would like to start? Ms. Mohammed, please.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. In the beginning, I would like to give our appreciation and so many thanks for the Brazilian.
Agora eu gostaria então de primeiramente agradecer ao Instituto Brasil África por esse convite e permitir que a nossa empresa possa participar desse fórum tão importante. E muitas vezes, e queremos também agradecer muito ao presidente do Instituto Brasil África, o professor João Bosco Monte. Vou me apresentar primeiro. Meu nome é Mohamed Abdulmalik Elfighi. Eu sou diretor executivo da empresa Libyan Iron and Steel Company e gostaria de pedir a permissão de vocês de cumprimentar e apresentar o embaixador da Líbia no Brasil, que está aqui participando conosco nesse fórum e nessa sessão. Também peço permissão para falar brevemente da situação do meu país, da Líbia. E após a Revolução de 2007, nós temos passado por algumas dificuldades. Agora o país está chegando perto da estabilidade, então podemos dizer que o nosso país está quase de volta à normalidade. E na Líbia e a capital Trípoli, mais especificamente, é onde fica a sede da nossa empresa e pode ser alcançada de vários lugares, através de Istambul, Tunis. Então, existem várias rotas e várias maneiras de chegar até a cidade de Trípoli, onde estamos localizados. Então, agora vou pedir licença para vocês para falar em árabe, no meu idioma nativo. So first of all, I ask you permission to lament the deaths and the martyr of so many martyrs in Gaza. This terrible killing that has happened by the so-called state of Israel, and the world is paralyzed, just watching as human rights are being violated. The other point I would like to make is that I would like to introduce my company to you. It is a state-run company or state-sponsored company, and we started our operations in 1983. We produce all types of commercial steel, especially in the Libyan market as well as other markets. In terms of numbers, I can say that over the last 5 years, the number of exports were upwards of $2 billion to countries all over the world, in Europe and Asia. And whatever was sold in the internal market was more than 3 million tons of all types of iron and steel. In the beginning of the company, we had more than $18 million sold in our national market, in the foreign market, and then another amount in the internal market. And so that's over $15 billion US. Speaking of the relations between Libya and Brazil, this commercial relationship is determined by our company. The raw materials for our company is imported from Brazil. Basically, all of it comes from Brazil, all the raw materials that we use in our production. And this comes from the internationally known companies Samarco and Vale do Rio Doce. So, speaking of numbers, in terms of numbers also, between 2012 and 2022, the supply was over 23 tons, 3.3 billion US dollars. And this was in general average number, and we also have a plan to expand this relationship over the next 4 or 5 years to duplicate or double these amounts. So we're talking about the relationship between Libya and Brazil in terms of our trade. So this relationship covers other products such as food products and also products from other sectors, but they are very far from the numbers represented by our imports in terms of raw materials from Brazil.
Mr. Radley, how can we expand and consolidate the connectivity and promote the great exchange of goods and services?
Let me also begin by congratulating the organizers of this very important forum, especially President João Bosque Monte. I know how difficult and challenging the noble efforts that you have undertaken are. I'm on the board of a foundation in New York, which is called Global Hope Coalition. And we try also to organize South-South cooperation meetings. And I know that while the rewards are very important, it's an extremely challenging path. So I congratulate you for everything you're doing. And I must say, Brazil itself, as a country, is undoubtedly the global leader in South-South cooperation. Having said that, I also think that South-South cooperation, SSC, a noble idea, something that has fired many idealists for generations, starting back in the conference of Bandung with President Sukarno. I just came from Indonesia. And we heard this morning from His Excellency Minister Celso Amorim that as a young man he fought colonialism, how this idea is a passion for him. I also, as a student in university in England, at that time we were fighting apartheid in South Africa. And it was always a passion, a goal, an amazing achievement for us, but in the distance of seeing South-South cooperation away from the previous models of imperialistic domination of the world that had existed for centuries. 50 years later, and a little bit wiser, I have to say that we are still, all of us here perhaps, much more in the domain of ideological wish and hope for this than real progress towards real South-South cooperation. And the reasons are manifold for this. It's not for lack of effort, because many leaders have tried. And it's not for lack of willingness to do this, because I think many people see the advantages of cooperation. But we have to ask ourselves, why is it, and again this was referred to this morning, that if you take a private jet from Dakar, Senegal, to come to Sao Paulo, it's a 4-hour flight. But usually, if you want to fly from Dakar to Sao Paulo, you have to spend 24 hours because you have to go through Paris or London or a European intermediate destination. So why is it that we haven't been able to achieve this kind of logistical links, maritime, aviation, between Global South? Why is it that we are still working very hard to achieve what other economic zones have achieved very quickly already? So I think the answer lies in basically finance. I think that's the most important hurdle that we have always faced. And it continues to be the most important hurdle. And many attempts have been made to create banks that would fund South-South cooperation, but these attempts still remain in embryonic stages, or at least very early, compared with other much more important financial institutions that have taken place to encourage rapid development. We've seen that in Asia, we've seen that in India, we've seen that in parts of Africa even, and definitely we've seen it in Latin America. But when we talk about South-South cooperation, we don't see that much. So maybe a pragmatic approach would be to think that we will be able to achieve the goal, the strategic goal of South-South cooperation by going through an intermediate stage. So there are 3 major poles in the northern hemisphere that could be the source of major financing for our projects. One is obviously the United States, one is the EU and UK, and one is China. So maybe we should think of some triangular models of each time Brazil and an African partner, any other South American country and an African partner, maybe also some Indian partners, Indonesian partners, Global South partnerships, each time being financed on specific projects by one of these 3 global sources of financing. So that is, in my opinion, something that would make our projects much more achievable. Having said that, let me say a few words about our own group, Redland, because I think it's an example of how the private sector could really drive this business. And I think we should really also hope much more for a leadership role for the private sector in this rather than the public sector. Because I think the private sector sees its interest in this kind of relationship. So let me give you the example of Redland. So Redland is a company that is owned by a family, and the family itself is an example of South-South cooperation. They came from the Indian state of Gujarat a century ago, and they settled in the African nation of Madagascar. And from there, they built this family group that is now present in more than 30 African countries, and it employs 8,000 people. And our technological pole is the #1 global brand in broadcast industry in France and the United States. We have 3 factories. We employ hundreds of people in France and hundreds in the United States. So it's a very successful example of how an African group can expand northwards, which is counterintuitive because it's normally the other way around. But this African group comes to Brazil because it has big agribusiness projects. And we have an interest, we have a commercial interest in finding partners in Brazil, because Brazil has already gone through these development stages, in the area of poultry farms, in the area of soybean and maize production, in the area of many different industrial areas of agriculture, and also in various technological fields. Again, Brazilian engineers are very good engineers, and we can work with them in African countries where we are having projects in a much better way that would be easier for us and commercially makes more sense for us than hiring engineers from the US or Europe. So that is an example of how a southern hemisphere group sees an interest in commercial ties between Brazil and an African country. And I think these are the models that we should now work on, expand, and develop, because this is the way South-South cooperation will finally come about. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Radkin. I would like to hear from you, Ms. Nana.
Thank you very much. And I also want to send or share greetings from the president of African Development Bank Group, Dr. Akunmi Adesina, and just share the sentiment that all of the staff of African Development Bank are serving an African optimist in chief. And so we're very bullish on the opportunities that the continent offers to various investors with respect to regional integration, connectivity, and trade of goods and services. And I think it's important in this forum to highlight that there has been success. I was discussing with my team before coming on the panel to try and get some numbers. And I was told that in 2021, Brazil-Africa trade alone reached $16 billion. And in 2022, that's projected as being 40% increased over 2021. And nearly 4% of all Brazilian exports are heading to Africa. So I think there is that cooperation, and the point is, how do we scale that further through infrastructure? So our bank is particularly keen to finance, as my colleague mentioned earlier, infrastructure connectivity on the continent to facilitate the crowding in of institutional investors, FDI, foreign direct investment, to capacitate continued trade between our two regions. And African Development Bank, as the only AAA rated institution on the entire continent of Africa, is participating in this forum, sponsoring this forum, because we're looking to encourage investors to work with us on PPP structures through risk mitigation instruments, so that we can solve this problem of trade and how to increase it. How do we move goods from one port to another? How do we increase railways? How do we increase road connectivity and even ICT? However, as my colleague just said, it cannot be an MDB-only responsibility. It cannot be just public sector. We really need to bring in investors from all over the world, including Brazil, to work with us on those PPP structures. And I think African Development Bank, New Development Bank, AFRI, EXIM, we're all here with risk mitigation products to enable that to take place. So at the African Development Bank, for example, we have a very robust trade facilitation program, which has concluded over 3,000 transactions since it began in 2013, valued at almost $3 billion. So we're facilitating confirming banks across the world, up to 130, to do more trade intra-Africa and through exports. In terms of connectivity on infrastructure, we're also offering political risk guarantees to bring in foreign direct investment, as well as partial credit guarantees to enable lenders to have the risk capital, to have the appetite to come in and invest in independent power producers, invest in the new bridges, invest in one-stop border posts, to enable all of the wonderful projects and relationship building that we need across Brazil and Africa. So I think my plea to everyone in this room, and to investors in particular, is please leverage the MDBs, please leverage the DFIs, tell us what financial solutions you need, because we have to crowd in that financing. And it is a collective effort. It's not something that the three of us on this stage will be able to solve. but we need the collective effort of everybody in the room. So please consider the DFI community as a partner for mobilizing and convening institutional investment into project finance that will facilitate that connectivity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Anna. Mr. Elfinge, on your initial words, you have mentioned that the goal of your company is to duplicate the partnership with Brazil. So, and for that, I think that one of the ways is like we need to promote long-term PPPs between Libya and Brazil companies and public sector as well. So how can we really promote these long-term PPP to attract the private investments and to provide the infrastructure that we are talking about?
شكرا على السؤال. طبعا أنا ذكرت بعض الأرقام فيما يتعلق بالتجارة ما بين ليبيا والبرازيل، وربما أضيف أن علاقة بدول المغرب العربي ليبيا وتونس والجزائر وموريتانيا والمغرب الأقصى. واردات المغرب العربي من البرازيل في سنة 22 كانت حصة ليبيا منها طبعا حسب الإحصائيات حوالي 350 مليون، وهي تمثل حوالي 10%.
Talking to the ambassador, he told me that the figures go far beyond the official figures. And I'd like to add that the exports from Brazil to Africa in 2022 went over 2% of the total amount exported to African countries. And I believe that we have the possibility of increasing this commercial relationship between Brazil and Libya, or Brazil with Maghreb countries. With regards to partnerships between private sector and public sectors, who leads the economy in the world is the private sector, and through this kind of partnership, through those companies between public and private sectors, we in Libya as the public sector was ruling the economy, but in the past 10 to 15 years, the private sector has played a very important role in the Libyan economy, and I believe that this is an opportunity for Brazilian companies and investors from the private sector to participate in the Libyan market, especially in countries, in Maghreb countries, and in African countries in general. And I am pretty sure that Brazil has several companies and business people and investors that would like to invest in this region. I can give you an example about the trade, the commerce with iron, and Brazil is quite experienced in this area, in investments in this area. We have iron stored in the southern Libya that we have around 1 billion tons, maybe 5 billion tons. This is an opportunity I'd like to invite Brazilian companies, Vale, San Marco, to invest in this area in Libya by installing plants in our country, considering that there is a big international demand for this kind of products in all parts of the world, because it represents a raw material to the world industry. Today, so this raw material is a great demand in the market, so I'd like to invite investors, Brazilian investors present on this forum to invest in this area. We also have a plan to develop some industries, and I'd like to invite Brazilian companies to become partners in investing in those plants.
Of Redlands, how can we promote the long-term PPP relationships?
Well, I think PPP is actually a very good model for cooperation between Brazil and African companies or African governments as well. We've had some experience with PPP in the areas of cooperation with Indonesia on paper manufacturing, and again, I go back to the elephant in the room. It's the question of finance. So one area which I think Brazil would, because Brazil is, as I said, and I say this because I've studied the issue, is the leader today in encouraging this South-South cooperation. So one area in which Brazil, and especially the forum, could think is to organize similar events in the Gulf, where you have sovereign funds that are looking for investment opportunities. And I think the sovereign funds of the Persian Gulf, be it Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Emirates, would be another source of financing for possible PPP cooperation between Brazilian entities, African entities, and with funding coming from sovereign funds, for example. We've had that not with Brazil, of course, but with Indonesia on similar projects funded by a sovereign fund in the Gulf. So again, it's just about finding the right area for investment and how this could be a win-win-win, win for a Brazilian entity, win for the African entity, and a win for all the funder, be it the sovereign fund, be it an international financing institution, or any other source of funding. But I think it would be a good idea for the forum to explore this avenue of how it can actually bring together some of the actors who are in this room, plus some others, to a place where we can actually find the source of financing for a specific or some specific PPP projects.
Thank you so much. I think Ms. President João Bosco is taking notes of this suggestion. And when you're talking about finance, I was just looking to Ms. Nana because she's coming from the African Development Bank. So how African Development Bank can help us to guarantee this long-term relationship on PPP?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, we have a lot of tools and instruments to crowd in private sector players in partnership with the governments. Our institution is an MDB, and as an MDB, we have what's called preferred creditor status. And so partnering with ourselves, again, other sponsors to this event, like New Development Bank and Afri-Exim, allows you to benefit from the halo of that preferred creditor status. So while there may be risk perceptions that are not there may be a certain risk perception associated with working with governments on the continent. Partnering with DFIs such as ourselves significantly reduces that risk because the countries are our shareholders. We have privileged access to them, and we can solve and overcome a number of challenges. But outside of that, I think that entities like the African Development Bank have a specific role to play also in pipeline generation or business development. I think one of the constraints to PPPs, especially large transformational projects as would be, for example, presented by PETA as part of the African Union, is bankability. And we don't really talk very much about project preparation and bankability of PPPs prior even to the financing stage. And I think African Development Bank is doing a lot in that area. We have a number of concessional resources, trust funds that help provide feasibility studies, ESIA studies, and the like to support achieving financial close for PPP transactions. And we've been very successful with PPPs across the continent. We have a plethora of examples that I'm happy to share after the session with anyone who's interested, from a bulk water treatment plant in Kigali that was a PPP structure. We also have the Henri Cognac Bédier Bridge toll road in Abidjan, the city that I traveled here from and where African Development Bank is headquartered. And all of these transactions, the bank facilitated the sovereign, the government's contribution through a sovereign loan, and was able to structure either through our syndication services, advisory, and other services, the private sector participation. So we really think that there's a lot of tools, and because maybe of our geographic distance, Brazilian investors are not that familiar with a lot of our organizations, but it's very important that we partner in this way because we can support even on the regulatory and legal environments through facilities like the African Legal Support Facility, which helps with the negotiation of very complex transactions. PPPs tend to be a bit sophisticated in terms of structuring because of the number of stakeholders. And so even on the transaction costs of such PPPs, we can help. So there's just a lot that we can do. And I think that as much as we're talking about increasing trade and leveraging on the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it is important that we get the financing, that we crowd investors in, that we also talk maybe a bit more about value addition also in the types of projects that we're looking at. So maybe we've talked a lot about agriculture, and we know that Africa is seen externally as, the cradle of agriculture. But how can we all work together to bring more manufacturing, more value addition, as opposed to trade being relegated to just commodities and extractives leaving the continent. So we are embarrassingly behind on the Sustainable Development Goals, and we need everybody at the table to, again, invest in renewable energy, invest in manufacturing, yes, invest in agriculture. And for example, within the African Development Bank, our new strategy for agriculture is special agriculture processing zones. So we are bringing together all of the elements into a specific region or area: power, feeder roads, logistics, ports, so that it facilitates on an ecosystem value chain basis, private sector coming in and utilizing all of that infrastructure. So again, the dialogue is open. Please let us know how we can facilitate investment coming in, but let's also broaden our view of what the continent, the opportunities on the continent with respect to PPPs, and have more confidence in some of our African countries, because the future is in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now I would like to pass the mic to the audience. If there is any questions to our panelists, if anybody wants to make a comment as well. So I can't see very well from here, so if somebody can help me to check. The light is just... There is no question. Okay, please, sir. Almost.
Yes, please. I have a question to Nana about this last that you mentioned about the new strategy for African development about the agri-processing zones. Are those specific for countries or any region in Africa? And how it would be, to bring some let's say, Brazilian companies for this business?
Yes, so the Special Agricultural Processing Zones, or what we call SAPZs, is an initiative in the bank to accumulate or consolidate the different needs for commodity value chain, so specific agricultural exports, cocoa, even foodstuffs like cassava, et cetera. They have specific value chains. And so we want to select certain regions where those agricultural produce is most prominent and develop an area, a special export zone with everything that would be needed for the value addition of the commodity. So we're working with the outgrowers, with the farmers to get them consolidated into a single community to facilitate buying in bulk. Subsequently, what is the infrastructure, physical infrastructure that's in that zone that can connect to city centers, that can connect to export to ports in the region or in the country? Then there's even technical assistance for capacity building. Do the farmers know how to check commodity prices? Is there technology around that they can leverage? Is there an understanding of weather insurance or disaster-related insurance? Is there an understanding of seeds? So we have a whole separate program called TAT that's just about seed production and improving productivity of agricultural outputs. So all of these different engagements, let's say, by African Development Bank are concentrated in a specific area so that investors know, okay, if we're talking about Cote d'Ivoire, or we're talking about Ghana, or we're talking about Zambia, or we're talking about whichever country, there's that special processing zone where it's a one-stop shop. You go there, you have everything. We can grow, as I mentioned, the export from the basic crude product to something a bit more, with more value addition, because that's really where the development of the continent is going to come from. And as an MDB, yes, we're concerned about investment, but we have a slightly more ESG orientation than, let's say, private sector. We want to know, are you creating jobs? Are you allowing the country to feed itself as well as export? Because we have food security ambitions. And how is the economy as a whole rising up on the value chain? So I'll be happy to connect anyone interested with the Director of Agriculture that's leading that effort.
Thank you so much. Any other question? No? Okay. So, okay.
Hello, good afternoon. Again for Nana. I work at the embassy, the Brazilian embassy in Maputo, and one of the main questions there for the Brazilian investment in Maputo is the availability of credit. I have some colleagues there who are trying to develop and to invest and they are talking with the African Development Bank, but they are finding a lot of procedures which are very hard to follow, especially related to the Mozambican bank system. So my question is, together with these agri-processing zones, does the bank have any new product or system or program for the production itself, including financing the area, financing the seeds you have talked, but do you have any program or procedures in this frontier? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question. So I'm going to ask my colleague Neema to wave. You have to see this lady. We have a special initiative called the Lusophone Compact that has a very bespoke suite of instruments ranging from technical assistance to guarantees to direct financing that is specifically designed to address the constraints and issues in Lusophone-speaking Africa. So she's the coordinator of this initiative, and I'm sure that we'll be happy to receive more information about the specific transaction you're talking about and see how we can work through whatever constraints that colleagues on the ground mentioned.
Another one there?
So I know the answer, but I'd like to hear from Abraham and Mohammed. I visit already Libya, and I also visit Madagascar. And my question is, why you guys are here inviting us, Brazil, to do business with you? Because Brazil is very far from Libya, Brazil is very far from Madagascar. We are not so close in terms of connections. I'm very excited to hear from you, very briefly, why you decide to come over here to invite us, Brazilians, to do business with you.
أوكي، شكرا جزيلا للسيد رئيس المعهد السيد مونتي.
Well, thank you very much for this question. I agree with you, Mr. Bosco, about the geographic distance. This also gets in the way of Brazilian investments in Libya, but I mentioned that due to my experience and due to the Brazilian experience, especially Samarco and Vale, in relation to the iron sector. And these are some of the largest and most experienced companies in the world in this area. And the raw materials in Libya need to be processed, and we need huge companies to do that. And since Brazil is huge and their experience in this area is huge and very vast, especially these two companies that I mentioned, I would like these two companies to invest in my country, in Libya.
Brazil is, I think, for an African, any African company that's working on an international level, an ideal partner, because you have already experimented and covered the road that we are taking. So you have so much experience, which is similar to ours. Again, I also want to point out that we're not just talking about shared opportunities, but even shared threats are similar between Africa and Brazil. Consider climate change. There are so many things that can be shared by Brazil and Africa, or African at the level of countries and at the level of companies. So we are very much in favor of finding joint partnerships with Brazilian companies on agricultural products, on renewable energies, on logistics, and also on mining. And these are the areas that our group works on, apart from, obviously, our technological pole, which is very focused on broadcast infrastructure, radio, TV, and communication. So for us, Brazil and Brazilian companies have the proven experience, have the necessary know-how, the manpower mostly, to be able to help us along this path. And again, it's a question of bringing together actors that can really contribute to a win-win-win solution for all of us.
Thank you so much. So now I would like to hear the final words of our panelists. And I will start now from the lady side. So, Ms. Nana, please.
No, I think I said it earlier. We are Afro-optimists at African Development Bank. We believe that the future is on that continent. We believe that we do need the technical, financial partnership of the rest of the world. And we're keen to work with anyone and everyone who is interested on making fantastic returns, but also delivering on the development goals, the Paris Declaration commitments, climate change, and all of the things that are going to make the world a more equitable place for us all. And so if there's a need or a financial solution that we can help deliver, please come to us. We're very open, we support private sector, and we look forward to seeing you all on the continent very soon.
Thank you, Ms. Nana. The production have called me because there is one more question, so I will allow that question before the final words. Sirs.
My question is to the gentleman. He was saying that why we come from Libya, from far away, to your country. So I can answer to you, gentlemen. I come together with the Libyan delegation. We come to support your country. We come as your guest. And the guests have always the right to explain why we come. However, it's great honor for us to come to support your country. And we are here to supporting your country. Inshallah, we will support. And goodbye.
Thank you so much.
أنا عندي إضافة بسيطة بس.
Well, I can say that the African countries have huge capabilities in the area of mining and also in human resources, and we need to adapt that to the different realities, but I think we can all improve the reality of our countries, and I think that will happen very soon. But we need to understand that development and progress requires stability, first of all, and then willpower. And to have that willpower, you need to have freedom. And sadly, the countries that have invaded Africa, first of all, what they did was to exploit Africa's capacity and the natural resources that Africa had. And their goal was never to develop the African countries. So I invite all the African countries to join together and to have the will to develop their natural resources, because we have the capacity to do this. And the development we are at an appropriate and perfect moment for development. We need to have the will to do it and work hard.
Africa is the future, as Nana just said, is not just a slogan, although to many of us right now, it is just a slogan. It's not a slogan because Africa, and specifically non-Mediterranean Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, if you like, is the world's fastest growing region. It's not a slogan because by 2050, 1 out of every 4 human being will be a sub-Saharan African. And it's not a slogan because Africa is the continent where today no global issue can be resolved without African participation. That's just as simple as that. But it's hard for people to get that because we're used to the old paradigms of dealing with Africa. Africa is not what we used to deal with. Africa is a rising force, it's a great force, and this forum, if it does the right thing, in 2 or 3 years, it'll need 4 times this space because there will be so many participants who want a piece of the success in Africa. But you're early, and that's the advantage of being early. I do think, again, that Brazil has a very special role to play in Africa because of shared challenges and shared opportunities and shared experiences. I just mentioned climate change. Climate resilience in Africa is a major topic, and African economies are fast adapting themselves to the new requirements of the new economy, the new green economy. And again, there are huge opportunities for Brazilian investments and companies in African countries in this area. And no global company like ours, Redland, can work today without a significant ESG and CSR contribution. And our CSR and ESG is, we've got 2. We've got the Akbar Ali Foundation, named after the family of Akbar Ali, who are the owners of this group, and Cinzia Akbar Ali, who is the wife of our chairman. She's Italian, but she does an amazing job in Southern Africa with this foundation for women's health. They screen 50,000 women in Madagascar every year for breast cancer. They have clinics in different areas of Madagascar. But apart from that, and this is a similar experience with Brazil, we are developing thousands of hectares of mangrove, restoring mangrove in Mauritania, in Congo, the Republic of Congo, not DRC, and in Madagascar. Again, this is something that I know in Brazil it's being done. So shared experiences can be very beneficial to us. And I think these are areas that we can look forward to working with the forum as the convener that can bring the forces that are necessary to bring about this rapid development, I hope.
For sure. Thank you so much. Thank you, sirs, lady. I invite you to take the picture. So we're going to take the picture, and after that we'll be watching a quick video from Redland.